It's midnight, and you are 3 episodes deep into a true crime documentary. You've told yourself you'll stop after this one. You won't. Something about watching a real killer explain his own reasoning, in his own words, keeps you locked in place. You are not alone in this. True crime is one of the most consumed genres on the planet right now. But the real question hiding underneath your late night binge is far stranger than whether the show is entertaining. It's whether the show, or the thousands like it, might be quietly building the next person who commits one of these crimes. Think about that for a second. A piece of content, made for entertainment, sitting inside the same category as news reporting, education, and pure curiosity. And yet, somewhere in the history of media, that same content has been blamed, again and again, for creating the very violence it depicts. Is that fair? Or is it just a comforting story we tell ourselves so the blame lands somewhere other than the person who actually pulled the trigger? Start over a century ago in London in the autumn of 1888. A killer, the press nicknamed Jack the Ripper, is murdering women in Whitechapel, and newspapers cannot get enough of it. Circulation soars. Illustrated crime pamphlets called Penny Dreadfuls flood the streets, dramatizing every gruesome detail for a public that cannot look away. Within months, other attacks begin to appear, mimicking the style, the letters, even the taunting tone of the original killer. Criminologists at the time noticed something uncomfortable. The coverage itself seems to be inspiring new violence. This is where the term copycat crime is born, and it has never really gone away. Fast forward to 2004. American researcher Lauren Coleman publishes a book called The Copycat Effect, tracing how media coverage of violence appears to seed further violence, almost like a virus jumping from one host to the next. Coleman isn't a fringe voice making wild claims. He's pulling from decades of documented cases where an attacker's own writings, journals, or online posts openly reference an earlier crime as inspiration. But here's the question worth sitting with. Is the media creating a new kind of person? Or is it simply handing an already troubled person a script to follow? That distinction matters more than it might seem. Criminologist Ray Surrett has spent much of his career studying exactly this question. In one study of a young prison population, he found that roughly 1 in 4 inmates admitted to committing a crime similar to something they had seen depicted in the media. But when Surrett dug deeper into what these offenders actually copied, the pattern became clearer. They rarely copied the motive, they copied the method. The media wasn't manufacturing the desire to steal or hurt or dominate. That desire, disturbingly, was often already there. What the media provided was the how. Notice what that means. A show, a headline, a viral video doesn't usually plant a seed of violence in someone with none. It hands a technique, a script, sometimes even a sense of validation to someone standing right at the edge of acting on an impulse they already had. This idea gets even more unsettling when you look at mass violence specifically. In a landmark report, U.S. Secret Service researchers Brian Vosaquil and Robert Fine studied 83 people who had attempted or carried out attacks on public figures or committed mass violence. Nearly 4 in 10 of them had, in their own writings or belongings, referenced a previous attacker as a kind of model. Not a stranger's random act, a deliberate study of someone who came before them. Criminologist Jacqueline Helfgott, who has spent 2 decades researching this exact phenomenon at Seattle University, describes many of these acts as performance crimes. The offender isn't just committing violence, they're staging it. For an audience, they expect the media and now social media to deliver. So why does this happen? Why would a documentary, a news report, or a true crime podcast function as fuel for someone already leaning toward violence rather than just information? Here's the counterintuitive part. Your brain is built to learn through imitation, and it does this far more automatically than you'd like to admit. Psychologists Tanya Chartrand and John Bargh demonstrated what's sometimes called the chameleon effect. People unconsciously mimic the postures, gestures, and mannerisms of those around them without any awareness that they're doing it. You don't consciously decide to cross your arms because the person across from you just did. Your brain does it for you, quietly, as a way of building social connection. Extend that same wiring towards stories of extreme behavior, told vividly and repeatedly, and you start to see how imitation can slip from harmless mirroring into something far darker, especially in someone whose grip on impulse control is already weak. This isn't unique to crime either. Long before anyone studied copycat killers, researchers were documenting something eerily similar with suicide. Sociologist David Phillips found that suicide rates spike measurably in the weeks following heavily publicized suicides, a pattern now known as the Werther effect, named after a novel whose fictional suicide was blamed for a wave of real ones in the 1700s. The mechanism looks remarkably similar to what Coleman and Surratt describe in Crime. Vivid, detailed, widely broadcast accounts of an act appear to lower the threshold for someone already vulnerable to attempt the same act themselves. None of this means true crime content is secretly manufacturing killers out of ordinary, contented people. That's not what the research shows, and it's important to say so clearly. Most people who watch true crime documentaries, read detective novels, or fall asleep to a murder podcast will never hurt anyone. The vast majority of viewers are drawn to the genre for entirely different, well-studied reasons: a desire to understand danger from a position of safety, a fascination with the psychology of why people break, or simply the pleasure of a solved mystery. The copycat effect isn't about the average viewer, it's about the narrow, specific population already standing near a threshold, for whom vivid, detailed coverage can function less like entertainment and more like a blueprint, which is exactly why the how of coverage matters so much. Researchers who study this pattern have repeatedly pointed to specific triggers, naming and glorifying the offender, publishing detailed methods, and giving the perpetrator's own words a platform. Remove those elements and the copycat effect weakens substantially. Some newsrooms have started doing exactly this, deliberately declining to name mass shooters, based directly on this body of research. It's a strange, quiet acknowledgement that the story itself can be a variable in whether the next tragedy happens. Now, bring this back to your midnight documentary, Binge. You are watching this content because your brain is drawn to understanding threat, drawn to pattern recognition, drawn to stories with order and resolution, even dark ones. For you, almost certainly, that's all this is. Curiosity, safely explored, but the same footage, the same detailed breakdown of a killer's methods and motivations and moment of decision lands very differently for the small number of people already circling their own breaking point. For them, it isn't a story about someone else, it's a rehearsal. That's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath your favorite genre. The content itself is rarely the cause. It's the accelerant. It doesn't create the fire. It just makes it easier for an already smoldering one to catch, spread, and find its shape. So tonight, when you press play on the next episode, you're not doing anything wrong. You're doing something deeply human, trying to make sense of the darkest parts of your species from the safety of your couch. But somewhere out there, tonight, someone else is watching the exact same episode and pulling something very different from it. Not fear, not understanding, a method, a model, a stage, waiting for its own performance. The real question was never whether the show is entertaining. It's who else is in the audience.